All right, as we are opening up the space to join us for today's webinar, we invite you all to just get comfy, grab some tea, grab some coffee, and we will get started shortly after 1:30. Hello, everybody. As you're joining us and getting settled and getting ready to join us in this webinar, we invite you to just do a little stretch, get settled, grab some coffee, grab some tea, and we will go ahead and get started close to 1:30. Thank you for being here. While we're all getting settled, I just want to share a little quote here on my cup. I always find it so useful to just have quotes around or let my coffee mug remind me of something that will carry me through the day. So wanted to share with you all and encourage you all to go get you a mug that says something that you wanted to say. Yes, unfortunately, you guys are muted, but I hear you. I feel your energy. We're all cheersing. Oh, I love that smile. There she is.
All right, we're just gonna give it a few more seconds and then we'll get started. So, thank you everybody for joining us this morning, this afternoon, this evening, depending on where you are in the world. It's really, really exciting to be here with all of you to talk about restorative justice. And so, with that, I want to open with a quote. And this is a quote by Octavia Butler. All that you touch, you change. all that you change changes you. The only lasting truth is change. So we invite you today to explore change and to learn more about restorative justice. As we begin, I want to acknowledge the land from which I and Simone come from, or where we're at. And so I want to acknowledge by acknowledging Ohlone land, which is known as Oakland. Also want to acknowledge Washington, D.C. It sits in Anacostan land. And so as we're doing land acknowledgements, and I invite you to learn more about where the land that you reside upon and ways to support local communities, local tribes in your area. With in the Bay Area, there's ways that folks can contribute to a land trust, and there may be other ways to participate and engage with your local communities as well. So I invite you to that. So you're here with us today. We're Impact Justice. So Impact Justice utilizes innovation and research for three main goals. One is to prevent people from entering into the legal system. Two is to ensure that folks are treated humanely if they have to be in the legal system. And then three, as people are returning home, what are the ways, the meaningful ways that we can allow folks to be welcomed back into their community and be embraced. And so with that, I want to talk a little bit about restorative justice, the Restorative Justice Project, which is a part of the prevention, that the first goal that I talked to y'all about. So at the Restorative Justice Project, we support 10 sites currently with training and with technical assistance to launch a pre-charge restorative justice diversion program. And so in order to do that, we partner with really, really, really amazing community-based organizations and legal system partners to pilot this new way and this shift that we have in approaching justice that meets the needs of survivors and that ends the criminalization of young people, especially youth of color. And so one new thing, which is this is a part of, is that we've launched this year, 2021, a training and innovation center. And so it's our way to stay in community with all of you, to engage, to share new ideas, to talk about like, how do we shift into a restorative paradigm. And so we hope that you continue to stay with us on the journey as we all are working towards collective liberation. A few things about today with the Zoom. So if you have questions, I love it. I'm already seeing folks are in the chat. I'm loving it. Please, please, please use the chat. Ask questions, share ideas, share quotes. We highly encourage the conversation. The Q&A function will be accessible, but we may not be able to get to that as much. So if you do have a question, we encourage you to put it in the chat. If you need to put it in the Q&A, you are more than welcome to. And then the last thing, I don't know if you noticed, but this is being recorded. So if for whatever reason you're like, I need to return to this, we definitely invite you to return, to rewatch, to share, and we'll also be uploading the slides that go along with this as well. And so you're probably like, who is this person talking to me? My name is Ashley George. I go by she, her, hers. And I am one of the co-directors of the Restorative Justice Project. I am daughter of Colin George and Tamara Lowry. I am born, raised, live, work in Ohlone land, Oakland. I am a healer. I approach this work as a healer, as wanting to see people live into their fullest, brightest, loveliest selves. My lineage is, my mom's from the Bay. Her folks are from the American South. My dad is from South America, Guyana. So there's a richness of experiences that I have that make me who I am. I am a dancer. I'm an artist, creative, innovator, and I am blessed to have had wonderful mentors and teachers in my life. My grandparents, Robert and Renee Lowry, my grandma Babs, my other teachers, Dr. Fania Davis, Rita Ranjitnam, Alfrey Sujatha Baliga, David Yusum, And I didn't mention this before, but I used to work in Oakland Unified School District doing restorative justice and coordinating after school programs for over 14 years. And I tell you, the young people have been some of my best teachers, have been some of my best guides. And so I honor them in teaching me as I do this work. And so Simone, I'm gonna pass it to you. Who
Thank
are
you.
you?
Who am I? Who is Simone? Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are. My name is Simone Fuller, and I am now 3 weeks into being the other co-director of the Restorative Justice Project at Impact Justice. I'm so grateful to be joining this team, to be stepping into this work, and I'm looking forward to getting to meet so many of the wonderful folks that are joining us on this webinar and will be engaging with us in this work as we move forward. I am a daughter, I am a granddaughter, I am an older sister, the oldest sister in my family. I am a partner, I am a teacher, and I am a friend. I love to just be moving. I love to be outdoors. I love to be playing sports. I love to be active. I love to be sharing in good energy and good vibes, usually with good music. I've had the great fortune of benefiting from learning from so many folks throughout my life, many of them very strong women, women of color. And I want to give a special acknowledgement to my grandma Joyce, who is celebrating her birthday today. So happy birthday, Grandma. And for me, my journey into this work really started in an education equity space in my home state of Minnesota, where I was working to try and bring things like restorative practices into our schools to try and address the disproportionate push out of kids of color from our schools. Following that trajectory, I spent the bulk of my career trying to shut the front door of the juvenile justice system, where many kids were ending up after being pushed out, and have worked with jurisdictions across the country with many, many amazing people across this country that are trying to work to address the changes in the youth justice system that we need to be able to see and move more kids back to their home communities to kind of work and thrive and be with their families. And so now I'm back kind of full circle, being able to work in a space where we are trying to expand restorative practices and restorative justice diversion to more and more places. And I couldn't be more thrilled that I am now in this space. So I think what we're going to ask you all to do is please just kind of share where you are, introduce yourselves in the chat. We would love to see who's with us. We had over 400 registrations for this webinar, so we are amongst a very large and robust community here today. So please, if you can, jump in the chat and let us know who you are, and make sure that you guys are connecting with each other as well. While we can't be in the same space, we're still trying to make connections. I saw some people from the Midwest, some people freezing in Minnesota. I know, I know all about it.
Yes, and folks are already jumping right in and sharing where they're from. So it was like really, really, really powerful. We have
Amazing.
folks. I'm seeing Georgia. I also want to take a moment to acknowledge from Gretchen and in the comments about closed captioning. We did not have closed captioning for today, and that is I want to take full responsibility and apologize for that, and want to take steps to make it right by you and by other folks who need that. And so my apologies. And I think Bree may have commented in the chat that we can definitely have a transcription of today's webinar. Our apologies, and in the future we will absolutely make sure to have that.
Thanks, Ashley. So we have so many wonderful introductions happening. Please keep them going. But for the time that we have today, I'm going to pass off to Ashley to go ahead and get us started.
All right, so learning objectives. One, we hope that you will have the ability to express restorative justice in your own words and understand restorative justice philosophies, I think it should be, and values. And so with that, our approach to this today is that there are no experts. And I know we're sitting here like talking about restorative justice, having a webinar, but we really value the collective wisdom. And so as you hear something, as you know something, please share it in the chat. We are intentional about our language. So you may hear us say person harm, person responsible, and it's because no one is ever fixed in a period of time. Along with that, we have a limitation on our time. So this webinar is about an hour. And so we won't be able to cover all of the values and philosophies of restorative justice and the nuances and the conversations that need to be had. But we hope that this is the beginning of a journey for some. Maybe this is your midway and you've been studying this. And so we hope this is to be part of your journey now as we learn and talk about restorative justice. And then we are intentionally making the space expansive. And what I mean by that is like, you're not going to walk away today with this is how I start this program, but you will walk away hopefully with a feeling of expansiveness within your heart, your thoughts, your body, as we share some of the things that we know, and hopefully that it's an opportunity to start and create and have multiple conversations. So if we're going to start somewhere, it's important for us to start with the roots. And so I'm thinking about restorative justice and the roots of restorative justice. It is important, it is necessary, it is imperative that we acknowledge the indigenous practices and of the First Nation folks that's in the United States, Canada, Australia, Aotearoa, also known as New Zealand, and that this is rooted in practices that are woven throughout a perspective, an ethos of healing and justice. It's a whole approach. And so when we're thinking about restorative justice, it's beyond a program, it's beyond one thing. It's really about like, how do we connect with one another? How do we create spaces where healing and justice occur naturally? And so oftentimes, you may even have been to a conference and folks have been talking about restorative justice, and other folks like, we've been doing that. We don't call it restorative justice. We know that's maybe a term that has recently become popular, but we have been doing that. So it's important to acknowledge the wisdom that folks have been holding and keeping and sharing that with us and sharing it with the world, so that we are able to return and return to ourselves and return to that way of being, of community, of connection, of healing, and of justice. I want to also acknowledge, you may also have learned about peacemaking and heard about peacemaking with restorative justice. And I want to acknowledge Chief Justice Robert Yazzie, and of the Dene and the Navajo Nation. And he speaks so beautifully about how practices of peacemaking are not a one-time thing, but it's woven throughout every aspect of the culture. And so I invite you, I offer to you to check out a YouTube where he's talking about Native American spirituality and restorative justice. It's really, really powerful. The link is shared. And then also to think about what he also talks about is the roots, and how the pathway towards healing through a peacemaking process. The pathway towards healing is through the acknowledgement and knowing of where you come from and who are your folks. And so in the journey of talking about a harm or talking about something that has occurred, there's this there's a acknowledgement of who you are and where you come from as part of the healing process. And so he describes it as peacemaking as a system of relationships where there is no need to force or to control. And yeah, I also want to talk about, as we're talking about roots, we're talking about different indigenous communities, that the Bantu folks in Southern Africa have a term, a philosophy, an ethos, Ubuntu. And so what that means, I am because we are. And so as you journey, and if you're thinking like, that sounds kind of like how my people get down, or I've heard this before, or if it resonates, you're like, I don't know if I've heard this before, but the idea of community, connection, interconnectedness being the pathway towards healing, if that resonates with you, is because almost, I would say most places, or most communities, if we go far enough back, use a practice, wouldn't call it restorative justice, but use a practice where community was essential, connection was essential, and the separation of someone because they may have done something wrong was not part of the culture. And so recently, because of things that have happened, genocide, colonialism, the chattel enslavement, have created disruptions and fractures in how we have been able to connect with ways of being that feel right and that nurture us. And so we are in a, I'll get there. My brain is moving, y'all. And so I want to just highlight the tree that we have here with the roots. And it was someone shared with me recently. Actually, Simone, you shared with me recently about the root systems in with forests and how in a forest. This was news to me, y'all. So in a forest, there are trees, and the trees communicate with one another. And if one tree has enough resources, so they said if the tree was strong and an older tree, large tree, it would share resources, water, nutrients with a younger, smaller tree. And I was like, oh my, that makes so much sense. Of course, nature shares and gives and provides so that the overall collective is doing well. And so and science now can like capture that with tools and capture that data, but it's always been there, it's always been happening. And so it just makes me think about like how we have nature around us to remind us when we forget. We have nature right there to remind us to return to ourselves, to return to our communities, to return to the things that feel right and make us feel whole. And so the roots of restorative justice have really just created an opportunity for wholeness. I want to highlight a report that was done by the Zare Institute, and it's a restorative justice listening project. It was authored by Sonia Shaw, Kara Stratford, and Sarah King. And there's a quote, and it talks about, and it was from Faith Tait from the Nisaga, a nation of 7,000 people. And it says, we don't have a word for offender in our language. The word we use is unhealed. So this is powerful, really, really, really powerful. And so what does it mean for us to shift our paradigm with our language, with our ways of being, with how we be with one another so that we don't even need we would never call someone an offender, right? The person's unhealed. And so that creates an opportunity to be healed, right? So I just want to share that with you. And it's something that stays with me quite often. Like the person, even when someone's like really, I'm like, ooh, I don't know, y'all. This is really getting me. But like, right? Let me take a thought back. Can I sit back with what my ego, what's coming up? And so I just want to share that with y'all. We're going to look at some grounding values of restorative justice. And before we do that, I just want to share a definition for you of restorative justice. And maybe Bree, if you could type this in the chat for me as I'm saying, it's pretty straightforward. It's pretty simple. So if after today, one of the learning objectives, you're able to explain restorative justice in your own words. So if after today, you're like, how do I remember restorative justice? I'm going to give you a little clue. So restorative justice is about relationships, okay? How we create, how we nurture, and how we mend those relationships when a harm has occurred. So restorative justice is about relationships, how we create them, how we nurture them, and how we mend them when a harm has occurred. Awesome. And so part of our grounding values when looking at restorative justice is a power with approach. And power with means that we are listening to one another. We are asking questions. We are not assuming that we know everything. I mentioned before about the expertise and how I think folks being experts has done some harm, right? It closes folks off to hearing and listening to someone who's not an expert, but they know something, right? And so if you're working with people, you're like, oh, that person may not be the technical term we call expert, if that person has something for me, I want to be with them. I want to listen. I want to ask questions. And so we ask people, what do you need? The next we have relationships and interconnectedness. So I just mentioned that restorative justice is really about relationships. And we've talked about prior with the interconnectedness and understanding the importance of that interconnectedness. And so, as we're talking about healing, as we've talked about justice, there's this whole approach. We are not separating anything, we are not separating parts of ourselves. And with that comes, there has to be an awareness of the self and doing and learning more about yourself, and so that you can be in deeper relationship with others. And if you're not able to find out all those answers, guess what? You have folks who are in your community where you can learn to, and they can maybe mirror something that you need in order to move forward. I also want to talk about our collective wisdom. And so, with collective wisdom, then if we're going to lean on the collective, it means that things may take a little bit more time, right? So, I talked about the power with approach, and the opposite of power with would be power over. And oftentimes, people are like, it takes a lot of time to do power with. It takes a lot of time to be collective. I'm like, it always seems like it takes a lot of time in the beginning. It's an investment that you make so that at the end, you're not going to have to return to an issue, a concern that could have been addressed maybe in the beginning. So it's a proactive approach to being in relationship with one another. So with that, things are going to have to shift around time. Things may have to shift around space. Practicing flexibility and adaptability. I know a lot of us are in this virtual space, and we're having to be adaptive now. And so we're learning, but sometimes the internet works, sometimes the internet doesn't work. How do you adapt, right? And so how are you practicing those aspects and seeing those as invitations to doing something or seeing something differently? And then also one of my teachers would share with me that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. So it's like the aspect of like collectivism and community, and how the medicine may actually come from the inspiration and the wisdom that comes from others. And then I want to talk about dignity. It is essential that when someone comes, that their whole self is supported, is seen, is valued, is acknowledged, is honored. Oftentimes, we don't create spaces where we honor one another's dignity. We don't know what people are showing up with. And so an aspect of the values is really taking time to honor the dignity of others. That's through our language. As I mentioned before, there's no word for, I don't even like saying the word, but it's unhealed. And through this, understanding the dignity, we are understanding that everyone has agency. They know what they need. If you ask someone enough questions, they will be able to get to what's there and be able to support their growth. And if they can't, the collective knows what it needs. I used to be a medic, a lay healthcare medic at a free clinic, and we had really long appointments. But one of the approaches that we would have was we would listen, and by the end of the appointment, I would ask, so what do you think it is? And we'd see skin, upper respiratory. I was like, what do you think it is? And the person would say, and then oftentimes we didn't even need to do the test, but the test would say exactly what the person felt. So like taking the time to listen to people is essential. All right, so you'll see here this diagram, and in the diagram it says practices of oppression. And so with that, you have a disconnecting from the source, distancing from the body, disengaging with emotions, and a distortion of the story. This is a paradigm that feels very resonant right now with capitalism and with the systems of oppression that we have, with the punitive approach that we approach it, right? So we're not supposed to listen, our body's tired, we're not supposed to listen. Disconnect from source, nature, people, our environment, Our emotions don't have information for us. Like we act like we don't need our emotions. And then the stories are distorted, and they're not. Yeah, they're distorted. And so we're asking, or no, we're not asking. We are moving towards practices of liberation, and we are embracing reconnecting with the source, reconnecting with our community, reconnecting with nature, our bodies. When you're tired, right, your body may be telling you to lay down. It may say you're dehydrated, have some water. How do we listen to our bodies and allow the information to surface? Re-engaging with our emotions. So our emotions are information. They're telling us something, and not just the emotions that we feel like, oh, this is a good one, this is that one. All of the emotions have a purpose, and what's that purpose? And acknowledging that purpose as we're moving through the world. And then reweaving of stories. My grandmother, I mentioned her, Renee Lowry. She is an amazing, 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 amazing storyteller. The stories might be light and fun, they may be more serious, but there's the way that we all hang at the edge of our seat as my grandmother's telling stories about her experience, her family, church, and life. So stories have a really important, and they're powerful, but they have an important part of our life. We come from a history of storytelling. And so when you're in a process, I didn't talk about the process of restorative justice, but in the process, one of the main things is the storytelling aspect, because storytelling builds empathy. And when you have empathy, people are able to connect. I want to highlight this theory, this framework. This framework was created by Cherie Tang. When Cherie showed us, we were like, wow, this makes a lot of sense, especially with the work that we do in restorative justice. And so how do we use our practices of liberation, and supported by restorative justice, maybe with the circle process, to really live into this paradigm, the liberated paradigm versus the paradigm that has caused so much harm. So looking at layers to restorative justice, you may have heard about circle process. I think I've kind of like mentioned it here and there, but you may have heard about it. And so it's a space where everyone can see everyone, you're sitting in a circle, there's a talking piece, everyone has an opportunity to speak, or they have an opportunity to pass, but it really equalizes the space, and it allows folks to share, and to be able to build community. And so this is just one process that's used to help and establish, and building community. Another circle process can also be used to address harm. And so when a harm has occurred, doing prep work and then bringing folks together to talk about what happened, how did it feel, what was the impact on you, what do you need? And this is, what do you need for the person who's been harmed, but also asking the person who's caused harm, what do you need? And so it's really important to think about it in those different ways. And the restorative community conferencing, we'll have a future webinar that really goes into depth about that, the second one. But it's really a process that's integrated into the legal system, but the cases are referred to a community-based organization to address harm and wrongdoing in that setting. With this, I want to highlight that community building is essential, and that we often focus on the harm, and we often focus on the restorative, or like the conferencing part, when it goes into like a legal system. And what would it look like to shift and invest more of our time into community building, right? And so if we invested more time, and remember I said create, nurture, mend. If we spent more time creating, if we spent more time nurturing, that means we don't have to spend as much time mending. Things will happen, the harm will occur, but what would the world look like if we really invested our energy into that community aspect piece? And then also it says here, I just want to highlight that in all of these processes, especially with the harm and community conferencing, there's the agreements, and then there's a discussion around like creating a pathway towards healing. And so we want to look and we want to understand harm. And so we're going to, I mentioned earlier, this Zare Institute at Howard Zare at Eastern Mennonite University. About 30 years ago, there's this framework that was created to really look at harm. And this practice of looking at harm and approaching harm has been used in schools, it's been used in community centers, it's been used in, I mentioned the legal setting. So it's been used in different ways to address harm. And so we have harm and wrongdoing, and this is our adaptation of it. Harm and wrongdoing are a violation of people and interpersonal relationships. Violations create obligations. And central to the obligation is to, as much as possible, do right by the people that you've harmed. Also, want to do right by the people who've harmed and to do right by the person who's caused the harm as well. And so I just want to sit with these, give you time to see in like this framework that we're using to look at harm. If a harm or wrongdoing is happening, it creates a break in a relationship. Even if you just met that person, there's a fracture in the relationship. That's your first interaction. From that fracture, from that violation, there's a need, obligation, or need that comes out of it. And central to that obligation or need, you got to make it right. We have to make it right. How do we make it right? How do we do that? And so we use these three questions to kind of like the next slide. We'll use these three questions to kind of really understand how do we do that, or what's the thought process behind it. So the approach, we're going to ask who has been harmed. Let's talk to them. Let's ask them, what do they need? And then we figure out, okay, we've talked to the person who's harmed. We ask them what they need. Whose obligation is it to meet those needs? And this timeline is not on a timeline. You can't say it's always going to be a month. It's going to be a week. This is on the timeline of the person who's been harmed. And so how do we shift, moving away from these structures that we feel like things have to be done in a certain way, to being able to pause, to wait, to give space, to listen, to embrace, to encourage, to maybe be silent, so that we can get to the need of the person who's been harmed. So Simone is going to talk about restorative justice. What are the ways that we've seen it in the world? How do we see it connecting to the work that we're doing and our vision moving forward?
Thanks, Ashley.
My pleasure.
So Ashley just spent a great deal of time and love and energy to talk to us about the foundational principles and values of restorative justice. And in that, really emphasized the importance of a focus on relationship and community building as the necessary work to be able to hold harm when it does occur. So I want to talk a little bit about when a harm does occur. For restorative justice, what is the goal? There's an art form in Japanese culture called kintsugi, which translates to golden repair. And folks may be familiar with this and may have heard this related to restorative justice, but really it's about honoring both the fractures that exist and the rebonding that exists, and finding beauty in those two things happening, right? So when something breaks, like a bowl, in Japanese culture, they use gold bonding to bring those things back together. And in many cases, the result is a newly formed object that highlights the story of that object, highlights the fracture of that object, using gold in a beautiful way to show that relationship. And one thing that somebody recently on our team talked to me about was that usually folks believe that restorative justice, the goal of restorative justice, is to bring back whole, right? It is to repair and restore to what was. And because restorative justice has restore in the title, it makes sense for people to kind of make that conclusion. But what restorative justice is actually talking about is returning and restoring a wholeness with oneself, a wholeness with one's community, and a wholeness with one's purpose and existence within a broader frame, right? And so for some people, and in some dynamics, it might look like returning back to the bowl that was, the relationship that used to be. But for others, it might look like creating something new. And in restorative justice practices, what we need to create the space for is for folks who have been impacted by harm to come together to define what they need to move forward and how they need to exist in a together to move forward, and together in the most expansive way to think about that, right? It may also look like being individual pieces of a larger, beautiful mosaic, honoring the purpose and the perspective of all folks in that beautiful picture, but knowing that each is necessary for that picture to be as beautiful and vibrant as it is. And as we sit with this concept and remember that the goal is not always to return to what was, it's not always to recreate where we've already been. It's important for us to take that also into our acknowledgement and our presence in this moment, right? We are in a moment where there is a movement that is ripe and is moving the ball forward for racial justice in our country. And the call in this movement is not to necessarily return to where we were. It's not necessarily to do what we've already done. It's to start something new. It is to move forward. It is to try something different, right? And so what this moment is calling for is a lot of the things that we see in restorative justice practices as foundational. It's calling on us to reflect on where our criminal legal system has already gotten us, right? We have seen, especially in the context of racial equity and racial justice, that even though we are in a moment where we've had decades where folks in the public are starting to become familiar and aware of some of the failings of our criminal legal system, we are seeing penetration across the political divides in our country, kind of galvanizing around the idea that we need to do something different with our criminal legal system. And folks inside the system themselves, as well as those outside, are recognizing the ways that our reform strategies that we've tried have fallen short, especially when it comes to racial disparities. Even in places across the country that have done a great deal of work to reduce the population size, to address mass incarceration, and try and build out alternatives, we're still seeing racial disparities persist, right? In some places, those disparities remain constant, and in some places, they worsen. Um, and no matter how many new alternatives we are developing, we continue to see that access to those alternatives, access to diversion, is still privileging white folks in our justice system over their Black and Brown peers. Another thing we want to say about racial justice in the context of restorative justice is that just because somebody is doing restorative justice work does not inherently mean that they are doing racial justice work. And I think this is extremely important for us to reference during this moment when there is a cry and a call for racial justice in our country, because we have to be thoughtful about the practices that we use and how we use them. We all at this point have the benefit of, and I would encourage folks to take a look at some of the new books and conversations that are happening, one of them being Colorizing Restorative Justice. In that book, folks of color who have been practicing restorative justice for decades are reflecting on and sharing the ways that when restorative justice is implemented without a focus on racial justice, without a focus on racial equity, without an understanding of racial bias, and without an acknowledgement of power and privilege, there are harms that can occur. There are ways in which restorative practices without that recognition of racial equity can perpetuate negative stereotypes, negative narratives. And so what we want to make sure is that as we connect restorative justice to the racial justice moment that we are in and the movement that we are building, that racial equity is central in the work that we do as a foundation for our restorative justice work. And what's very exciting about this moment and this opportunity we are all sitting in and as our country is that the call is also about new leadership. It's about folks who are closest to the challenges that we have ahead of us being front and center and driving those solutions, being at the front of our movements, being at the front of our tables, designing what it is that we need to move forward. We are also in a space where people are demanding a truth telling. People are ready to reckon with the truths of our country, the experiences of our people, and all people, especially people that have been pushed furthest to the margins. And people are ready to innovate. People are ready for something different. People do not want to use the strategies we've used in the past. They don't want to recreate the reforms that we've used already. They want to try something. They want to take a risk. They want to put their energy into something new, into building what we do want instead of spending so much time focused on what we don't want. And that is being followed up with different kinds of investments and an opportunity for folks to really invest in the space to build movements, the space to focus on healing and building the relationships that we will need to carry us forward. And when done with an eye towards racial justice, when done in the ways that uphold the values and the principles that are central to restorative justice is one of those things. It's one of those new investments that can help put us on the path to where we want to go. And of course, Audre Lorde is always coming through. Oops. I hope you can see that malfunction. Audre Lorde is always coming through with something for us to hold on to. Her quote here reminds us that in order for us to take down and move beyond the systems of harm and oppression that we are operating within now, we will have to invest our time and energy and resources into the new tools that are going to carry us forward. Okay. And we also want to spend some time touching on something that comes up often, especially during this time when people are so active and so engaged in thinking about justice differently. One of the questions that we receive and folks are right to grapple with is the relationship between transformative justice and restorative justice. And first and foremost, I think it's important to say that there is absolutely a relationship. They are absolutely in conversation with one another. They are oftentimes overlapping each other, but it is also important to recognize that they are not necessarily the same thing and can't always be subbed out for one another. So as Ashley spent time talking to us about, we know that restorative justice is rooted and based in Indigenous practices from all around the world, that it is typically identified by a set of certain practices and certain processes. Think about circles, think about talking sticks, and especially as restorative justice has continued to be adopted, particularly into Western culture, it sometimes operates and partners alongside and with the criminal legal system that we have now. Transformative justice is rooted in a political framework. Transformative justice is an anti-carceral, feminist, abolitionist-based movement. It is explicitly naming the historic and systemic harms of our country. It is of our country, both within and the work and the troubling practices and oppression that we have spread around the world. And it does not rely on the state or the existing carceral system, right? There is a very clear line in the work that the transformative justice movement is doing to redefine how we address harm and safety in our country. And while there are some differences between the two, they often overlap. They are often promoting some of the same ethos and fundamental values that are important for us to carry forward. There is a focus on accountability and healing built into both. There is an orientation around harmed people, harm in the broadest sense, right? Harm for folks interpersonally and harm that people have experienced as a result of systemic and societal actions. And they're all rooted in relationships. And so for us and our team at Impact Justice, we are constantly revisiting this. We are constantly asking ourselves questions and trying to push ourselves as much in the overlap as we can, because we know that a transformative vision of justice is the roots and the goal that we are all working towards. So as we start to come to a close for today's session, we wanted to make sure to leave you all with a few takeaways. And I wanted to quickly revisit something that Ashley said at the top of this webinar. For folks that were coming to this webinar hoping to hear, how can I do the do? How can I take this and do the program? We intentionally designed this particular webinar to not go into those specifics, not go into those specific programs, because there is there are ways that skipping this step, skipping over the foundations, not really sitting with the values, the philosophies, and the principles of restorative justice as a basis can increase the likelihood that when you are implementing restorative justice, you run afoul, you mess up, you don't necessarily do it in the way that it's designed to be used. So we almost consider this kind of a prerequisite, right? If you want to do restorative justice, you've got to start at the basis, you've got to start at the roots. So just a couple of takeaways to summarize what we've talked through today. What I just said, restorative justice is not just a program, right? It's a paradigm shift. It is so much bigger than the programs that we implement. It's the way that we implement, it's the way that we exist in relationship with others, it's the way that we exist in our communities. And so holding that as a fundamental component of how we understand restorative justice is critical. As Ashley shared with us, the definition of restorative justice is all about relationships, right? So if you remember nothing else, restorative justice equals relationships. And as some of you might be feeling right now, we're asking you to build a little bit of comfort and curiosity, right? We want you all to recognize that even in a society where we are constantly kind of pushed to recognize ourselves and our worth due with our productivity, how much knowledge we put into the world, how many facts we produce, how many metrics we achieve. What we invite and what restorative justice invites us to consider is, what does it look like to land in questions, right? To bring us back to a space of wondering, to want to know more and ask more. And in that spirit, we have a couple of offerings for you all as you step out into the world after being in this webinar with us, and before you step into the following webinars that we have in our series. We're going to give you a little bit of a chance to build your restorative justice muscles, right? Like there's a practice to this. So I know in our virtual world, it's hard to be with the people that we love. It's hard to necessarily be in spaces with the folks we define as our community, but whether it's the folks in your home, whether it's the folks in your pod, we know these are a thing now, or if it's virtual, right? Sit in circle with your community, however you define that, and explore some questions. Who are you, right? Ask people and give everybody a chance in the circle to answer these questions. Who are you? How are you doing? Ashley and I have recently talked about how it's so funny when somebody asks you how you're doing and you actually answer them, right? When you don't just say good or I'm all right, but you actually tell them how you are. We're often asking questions without actually being curious about the answer. And so we invite you to ask folks how they're doing and listen to how they're doing. And if we want to start kind of pulling in concepts around restorative justice, ask, what does it mean from everyone's unique perspective to make it right? What does it mean to make things right? So here on this beautiful slide, I'm going to invite you all to sit with us and go through a quick meditation. This meditation is one that we hope will help you center for your day, center for the middle of your day. And before we open up for questions, we invite you to sit with us. So I'm asking you to now sit in a comfortable position, close your eyes, find a calm center inside yourself. Keep your eyes closed or dimmed, but imagine that you are awakening from a deep, very restful nap, a sleep filled with delightful dreams. As you awaken, you see the sky, blue, sunny, white clouds on the horizon. You're laying on your back in thick grass. Sitting up, you look around and notice you are sitting on a high hill, atop a hill that is neatly trimmed with hedges. You smell the grass, meadow, flowers, the fresh breeze. Birds are singing. Standing, you walk over the hedges, where you notice a white gate. Putting your hand on the latch, you lift it and pause. Anything could be on the other side. You swing the gate open and walk into the morning of the year 2050. You begin walking down the path, each step taking you deeper into this new world that is in 2050. You look down the hill and realize that every idea of liberation and justice that you had for the future has been achieved. The best and highest hopes that you had for the future back in 2021 have all been realized. 2050 is so different from 2021. What do you see? What do you hear, smell? You walk down the hill, further into this changed world. What is a day in 2050 like? What does the community toward which you are walking look like? What are people doing? How are children playing? Where are the elderly? Where are people working? What are they wearing? What do you hear? Voices? Animals? Running water? Engines? Can you smell gardens? Cooking? What else can you smell? What else do you hear? What are the textures you see? As you wander through this community, you look for liberation and justice and you find it. What is it? Now, it's time for you to go. Before you get ready to come back to the present time, do what you need to do in order to say goodbye to this wonderful place and know that you can come back and visit anytime you wish. In a few moments, we'll count back from 3 to 1. At the count of 1, you will be awake and renewed, knowing that you can remember everything you need to reach the future of your vision. Starting with 3, you're coming back now. You're becoming more awake and alive. 2, you're wiggling your fingers and your toes, moving your body, feeling the temperature of your skin. And 1, your eyes are open. You're feeling totally awake and renewed. Thank you all for spending some time with us in this meditation. We are going to now open up the space for reflections and for questions before we come to a close. So we'll go ahead and monitor the chat, and we have some of our teammates who are sending us some questions, so we'll go ahead and get those started. But please feel free to share reflections, share things that you're holding and you're going to take away from this, and ask us some questions as well. Ashley, do you want to jump in on any of the questions we have so far?
Yeah, we have a document. I'm going to pull some questions in just a moment. But I just want to say thank you so much, Simone. I was like, yes, I don't want to come out. But you're like, you can return. So I was like, okay.
We're back. 2021.
I'm coming back. Yes, we do have some questions. Okay, let's see here. So first question, it says that is there either a project or a process that can be identified specifically as transformative? And I feel like that's a big question.
I think one thing that we would invite folks to do is there is an excellent resource that exists at the fingertips of all of us. Transformharm.org is a site that has been created by folks in the transformative justice movement that really helps to clarify and provide examples and enter into a conversation about what transformative justice is. So I would invite folks to check out that website, check out the teachings of Miriam Kaba. There are folks that are much more equipped to take on those questions and walk you through those examples than us. And we would be happy to kind of talk more about it, but definitely want to push you towards those resources as a first stop.
Awesome. And then I'm going to kind of combine these two questions so they feel similar. And so one is, how can a community have restorative justice without changes in systems that with the system that harms them? for example, police department, criminal justice system, enhancement, sentencing laws. So that's one question. Like when the system harms, what do we like? How can a community have restorative justice? And then it says, great presentation. Any suggestions on how a country can move forward in a restorative way in the aftermath of January 6th insurrections at the Capitol? And so I can start. I've been watching the hearings that have been, the impeachment hearings that have been occurring, and it has been come to my attention prior to, and this kind of gets to the first question I was that I read. But in order for us to have restorative justice, in order for us to be fully in a restorative paradigm, we have to address the harms that have occurred to people here in the US. And I'm speaking relatively being in the US. But if there are other places where harm has occurred, you cannot move forward until you address. And so there needs to be a truth and reconciliation process here in the States. And folks need to be held accountable for things that happens and harm that occurs. And so as we're talking about and feeling the visceral feelings of the division and concern with how to move forward, we may go somewhere, but we may not get to where we want to go until we pause, until we stop, until we have an honest conversation. So with that paradigm that we showed, the two different paradigms, it was the distortion of stories, right? Until we have an honest conversation about what has happened here, specifically in the States, then there's no moving forward, unfortunately. And I believe that the time is absolutely now. We have to do it, and it needs to be like I don't even know have all the processes. I know Our Joy, they've been doing a lot of work with this. I also want to highlight Our Joy for the trainings that they'll be having, specifically for they're having an upcoming training for Black folks who identify as male. So if you're interested, please apply. But yeah, we have to have honest conversations. There cannot be any more of this like, oh, I don't want to offend. Nope, we're talking about it. We're being honest. We're having honest questions. So I think that's one way to start to be able to address. And then as interpersonal harms come up, I say, I think we just need to be honest with one another, and it will be uncomfortable, but I think that's our pathway towards healing.
Absolutely. The only thing I would add to that is that there's so many layers of harm, unfortunately, that we're all going to have to unpack, both in incidences like the insurrection on January 6th, but those incidences are existing in such a broad constellation of harms that have happened in this country that, to Ashley's point, like, we just have to be really ready to have a truth and reconciliation throughout our country that is not just going to address these particular incidences, but is going to address the layers of harm and the foundations of harm that have been the for the existence of our country at the roots, right? There is harm that was baked into how our country was birthed, and how it's operated since, and the systems and institutions that have been built on top of that. So for us to dig into this, like, we're going to have to address these incidences while recognizing that we're going to have to address to a deeper level why these incidences come to be, and the examples of the ways that those incidences are connected to this foundation of harm that's been built in from the beginning.
Yes, I'm so glad you said that last piece, like connecting those pieces, they are all connected. And that's why we're at this point,
Yeah.
or the point January 6th happened. We're at that point.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So I see are at 2:30, and we respect folks' times. Go ahead, sorry.
There's one more question.
Oh, awesome.
So I'm just going to read the whole thing, just so I don't make sure I miss the question. I really appreciate the positivity and a hopeful attention we're doing to this process. Let's see. So a lot of it feels aspirational about the values and the principles of RJ. Though, could someone address obstacles or challenges to shifting the paradigm? In particular, I'm thinking about the principle that violation creates obligation. and how much resistance there often seems to be around accepting this even to begin. Good question. Kind of actually ties into the question we had before. So change is not going to happen overnight. When we begin to have honest conversations, when we begin a process of truth and accountability, um, people will be ready and open to taking responsibility. So like you can't force someone to take responsibility. And unfortunately, we have a system now and a culture now that encourages people not to take responsibility. And so, what does it look like to have a paradigm where people not only are encouraged to take responsibility, but they want to, because I want to be in a better relationship with you. It doesn't feel good. I may not know you, and yet this fracture in our relationship, it's not sitting with me. And so, how are we building those ways of connecting? Some ways that people are doing it locally is to and as Simone offered, is like to start having circles with one another. Just start having conversations and using your sphere of influence to begin to build those relationships and encourage other people to talk to one another. Before you talk, maybe say like, "What do you need? I hear what you're saying. Tell me a little bit more." And so, inviting someone to be able to share who they are and to be able to allow their full selves to be seen. When we create the world like that, it's going to be a process. But I think those are tangible, and it feels also, they're simple, but yet very, very important on the steps towards um, this paradigm that we want. And also coming to these things, having conversations like this is a beginning, a way to start. I would be remiss if I forgot to let y'all know we do have an online toolkit. So it's called rjdtoolkit.org, or that's the line, but we have a restorative justice diversion toolkit. On this, it's more specific to the restorative justice diversion work that we'll mention in just a moment. But there are other resources and ways that you can learn more about restorative justice in your communities.
Okay. I'm sure there are many more questions and many more things for us to discuss, which luckily we have other opportunities to dive into. So before we close today, we want to remind folks that this is just the first webinar in a 3-part series that we're using to launch into our training and innovation center. So we want to invite you all and remind you that our next webinar that will dive into the specifics around restorative justice diversion and give a lot more detail and body to the model that we use at the Restorative Justice Project at Impact Justice. That will be on March 10th. So please check your emails, go to the website, register. We hope to see you there. And as Ashley mentioned, the final webinar of this series will go into a lot of detail about how to navigate the remarkable resource that we've created in our toolkit, which is meant to help folks kind of navigate the various steps and elements necessary to bring restorative justice diversion to their local jurisdiction. So we will close there. Thank you so much. I know that I really love spending this time with you all, even though I cannot see you. But I thank you for being active in the chat. Ashley, is there anything you want to say to close?
Same. Just want to say thank you. It's such a pleasure. Such a pleasure. And thank you for allowing us and joining us on our first webinar that kicks off our launches the training and innovation center. So thank you, all.
Perfect. Gratitude to everyone. Thank you so much. We'll see you on the next one.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye. Yeah, let me check out this chat. Oh,
I know, it's really sweet.
So much love. Thank you.
Our pleasure, folks. Our pleasure.
It is being recorded, and we will send it out in a follow-up email after this webinar. So we will be sending the recording and the slides.
Yes, and we would love for you to fill out a survey that will come along to you as well, to just get your feedback and to see how we can best support our community. Yes, thanks everyone. Summer, Donna, Heather, Janessa.
Thank you.